Good evening, everyone, and welcome. The meeting will come to order at this time. Welcome to our public hearing and second reading of the FY25 General Fund Budget. It's great to see everyone here tonight. It's great to have a big crowd, and we welcome you, and we're thankful for your presence. Our next matter of business is the acceptance of public comments. We have 3 speakers who are signed up, and at this time I'm going to ask our Vice Chair, Ms. Debbie Bush, to share the guidelines for making public comments. But before I do, I want to say, Ms. Bush, welcome back. It's great to have you back on the dais. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would like to welcome each and every one of you that have signed up to speak tonight. Thank you for your interest in Greenville County Schools. As each speaker's name is called, he or she should proceed to the podium at the end of the board's dais, where there is a microphone and a light system. Each speaker has up to 3 minutes to speak to the board. The light system will be green for the first 2 minutes and will turn yellow when 1 minute remains on the speaker's allotted time. In keeping with board policy KCA, abusive language or personal attacks aimed at students or staff members will not be permitted. All speakers are expected to behave in an orderly and respectful manner. The board will not engage in discussion with the speaker or respond to comments. The superintendent will designate a member of the staff to respond to each speaker in an appropriate and timely manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bush, for sharing the guidelines. Our first speaker is A.J. Jeffcoat.
Good evening, board. Thank you for your opportunity tonight to let me speak. Like she said, my name is A.J. Jeffcoat. I'm a 13-year educator, serving as a 6th grade science teacher at Rudolph Gordon School in Simpsonville. Just wanted to talk to you tonight about just the budget and urge you to invest in our hardworking GCS teachers and staff by approving the budget presented by the administration and supporting a pay increase for my colleagues and others who work tirelessly to pursue the mission of this district. I know it is hard to raise taxes, but the cost of not making this investment is even higher, and I wanted to give you just a few points tonight. First, quality of education. Higher salaries can attract and retain talented and dedicated teachers. Better teachers generally lead to better education outcomes, which can enhance the overall quality of the workforce in the community, benefiting local businesses and the economy. If you are a teacher in this room, raise your hand. Awesome. Good to see you guys tonight. Quality schools contribute to the overall quality of life in a community with resources, events, and programs that can be valuable to all residents, creating a more engaged and cohesive community. Economic impact. Teachers who are fairly compensated are more likely to spend money in their local communities, which can boost local economies. Better education systems produce a more skilled workforce, attracting businesses and fostering economic economic growth. This can lead to job creation and an increased economic opportunities within the community, benefiting everyone, including those without children in our schools. Property values. Good schools can lead to higher property values. Even if you don't have children, living in a district known for its quality of education like ours can increase the value of your property and improve the overall desirability of the area, benefiting homeowners financially in the long run. Crime reduction. I won't go into that, but I feel like if we can continue to educate our students in this community, there will be reduced crime and safer communities for everyone. Community well-being. Education is a cornerstone of a thriving community. Well-paid teachers are more likely to be invested in their schools and community, leading to a stable and engaged in neighborhoods, and educated citizens are more likely to contribute positively to the community itself. In closing, I just want to again say thank you, but by supporting teacher salary raises, you contribute to a healthier, more prosperous, and more equitable society, which benefits everyone, including those without children in the school system. I am proud, so proud to be an educator in Greenville, and I'm grateful for the past investments that this board has made in my colleagues and the students we serve. Thank you for supporting the proposed budget and what it says about our community.
Thank you, Ms. Jeffcoat. And I would just like to say on behalf of the board, welcome to all the teachers who are here tonight. It's always great when we have a large show of our teachers. Our next speaker is Ben Howell.
School district staff and school board, you all have a monumental task in providing the necessary services to students and families in the school district. I am here representing the community, my neighborhood, my family, and I appreciate everything that y'all do, the complexity of what you do, the enormity of the challenges that the school board and the staff has. I do respect that a lot. From academic and emotional support to health and wellness, athletic programs, and transportation services. In order to effectively meet these needs, you must be mindful of the resources and make wise decisions when it comes to budgeting. Cutting unnecessary line items, managing the resources efficiently, and ensuring adequate compensation and benefits for the staff are all important. Please remember the financial strain that many in our community are facing. Think affordable housing, rent, groceries, medicine, transportation, being able to purchase a vehicle. It may seem like a small burden at first, a small increase on each family. It's not a small increase when it's stacked on top of other increases and inflation. It can quickly add up, and it can have a significant impact on those struggling to make ends meet. Just like a game of Jenga or a series of sit-ups. There is a breaking point for everyone. You must be sensible in decision-making and find cost savings, which is the key, within your current budget, rather than burdening the community with additional taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. Our final speaker is Patricia Stewart.
Hi, my name is Patty Stewart, and this is my 19th year teaching. I currently teach elementary art in Greenville County. I was excited to see Dr. Royster's statement that the proposed budget reflects your priority to attract and retain high-quality teachers. This is extremely important to our students and the future of our community. I want to thank you all for making this a priority. I was pleased to see some of your line items, especially increased pay for all staff and funding for full-time substitutes. I came here to share more ideas. Paying teachers an hourly rate when they have to cover classes during their planning time. A further increase to substitute pay and recruitment. And the hiring of non-certified staff to cover lunch, recess, and other duties to add planning for teachers. Being a teacher right now is emotionally and physically exhausting. If I leave the profession, it will be because of exhaustion and burnout. Pay definitely helps, but it's not the only factor. It currently feels impossible to maintain work-life balance, and it's not just me. Work-life balance was flagged as one of the highest concerns in our Upbeat survey last year. To lessen our load, we need smaller class sizes and more time to plan highly engaging lessons that can compete with video games and TikTok, and then modify the lessons to reach the varying learning needs that are within each class. No longer are there 1 or 2 students per class that regularly require extra assistance and attention. In my current job, 40 to 60% of our students have delays academically, developmentally, socially, or emotionally, and many have delays in 2 or more areas. Because of this, we need more teachers and smaller class sizes. I have watched as a job gets posted at my school but goes unfulfilled, and then the students are dispersed among the other teachers within the same grade level, and we all carry on as if we're not missing an entire teacher. As we wait on finding more teachers and having smaller class sizes, I believe it's worth considering the hiring of non-certified staff to alleviate some teacher responsibilities, such as hallway duty, lunch, recess, car line. These tasks do not require a teaching license, and in some districts, non-certified staff members are hired to do these things, thus giving teachers more time to plan. Please consider this. This past school year, someone decided that classroom teachers at my school needed more planning time and that related arts teachers would be used to help with that. So in addition to teaching my art classes, I was scheduled as a substitute twice a week. I was assigned homeroom classes that I went to and subbed for 40 minutes at a time so they could have extra planning. This was extremely frustrating and demeaning to me as a certified arts teacher. We all need more time, but taking it from one group of teachers to give it to another group is not the solution. This plan is currently in place for next school year at my school. We also had a wonderful full-time substitute in our building, but there was times that more than one person was out sick. That meant the class was either divided up and spread throughout the building, or that if we could pay teachers, the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart, and thank you again to all of our speakers tonight. We appreciate you for coming and speaking with us. This concludes the public hearing portion of our meeting of the FY25 General Fund Budget. Again, thank you to everyone for their presence, and I just want to remind everyone that the second reading will begin at 6:30 prompt, and we hope that you will stay for that meeting. But at this time, I would like to adjourn the public hearing for the FY25 General Fund, and I need a motion to adjourn. We have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Ms. Middleton. All right, all in favor of the motion, say aye. All opposed, no. The motion carries, and the public hearing is adjourned at 6:12, and again, we'll begin back at 6:30 with the second reading of the budget. Thank you so much. The meeting will come to order. Welcome to our second reading of the FY25 General Fund Budget. Again, it's great to see everyone present, and we certainly appreciate you for staying for this session. Our next matter of business is the recommended FY25 General Fund Budget. Dr. Royster.
Thank you, Dr. Stiles. I think it's always important, whether it's at the budget workshop, first reading or second reading, for us to take a few minutes to reflect on where we are. Because where we are, what we do, and what we accomplish is only able to be accomplished by having the resources necessary to make sure that we have the people in place to deliver instruction and to support the delivery of that instruction. The resources that they need and the other personnel that are necessary to make sure they have everything they need to have to be successful in the classroom and in the schools. So as we look at student success, we're currently ranked 12th overall among all school districts in South Carolina when you look at an index of 21 key measures of academic attainment. And that's basically the 21 key measures that are common across all school districts in the state. We ranked number 19 in 2012. Our students outperformed the state and the nation on the SAT and the ACT. Last year's senior class earned $154 million in scholarship offers, representing an immediate return on our community's investment in education. According to the most recent state report cards, 91% of Greenville County schools meet or exceed the criteria to ensure students meet the profile of the South Carolina graduate. Greenville County schools outperformed the state in ELA, math, and science for elementary and middle schools, and in the percent of graduates who are considered college and career ready on the 23 state report card. The district's graduation rate has risen 13 points since 2012 to 85%. The graduation rate has increased 17 points among African American students, 13 points for Hispanic Latino students, 16 points for students with limited English proficiency, and 29 points for students with disabilities since 2012. During the 22-23 school year, our students earned 10,442 industry certifications, a 19% increase over the previous year and a 536% increase since 2017-18. 1,423 students completed a work-based learning opportunity, that is an internship, a co-op, or an apprenticeship with 543 partner businesses and organizations in 22-23, an increase of 14% over the previous year and nearly 900% since 2018-19. In 22-23, our students earned 28,687 potential college credit hours via AP and dual credit courses, a 78% increase from 2016-17. Hours earned at no cost to those students or their parents. Obviously, it takes a quality workforce to create the opportunity for these improvements. Quality and experienced teacher in the classroom. All the research that's been done around student attainment shows a strong connection between a quality teacher in the classroom and a quality principal leading the school. Moving students multiple months of achievement compared to students who do not have a quality teacher in the classroom or a quality principal leading the building. Those people need to be supported by other quality individuals. So it's extremely important that we compensate in a manner that recognizes the importance of every one of those employees and helps to attract and retain quality individuals in every position. We've moved from 20th in overall teacher pay to 4th in 10 years, from 20th to 4th. This was the first district in the state to approve a $40,000 starting salary for teachers, which this year is at $47,738. Our teacher turnover rate for the 22-23 year is 10%, compared to the state average of 13%. Our salary schedule for teachers has 12 steps above the state schedule, all 100% locally funded. The top pay for a teacher in Greenville County Schools is currently $100,947. If that individual has a doctorate, then more than 34 years experience. 67% of our teachers have a master's degree or higher and have more than 12 years experience in the classroom, our average teacher. So in the general fund budget, where are we spending our money? If you look at the 24 general fund budget, $795.8 million goes to salaries and benefits. 68.4 all other expenditures. That's about 92% versus 8%. The people that are paid, what categories are they in? Well, the reason for the difference in the sizes of the people, it directly correlates to the amount of the budget that is devoted to the salaries for those individuals. The first one, the very largest person, at $509.2 million are teachers and aides. And you see right there who's included in that, teachers and aides. You see them listed. Those are people delivering direct instruction to students. Instructional support, $96.9 million. You see there, instructional support. Now that includes some people that are also delivering instructional services directly to students. Social workers, behavior interventionists, school counselors, media specialists, occupational therapists and physical therapists, psychologists. Some of the others, more indirect instructional support. The next person in line there at $71.3 million is operations at the school level. You'll see there, that's bus supervisors, bus drivers, the drivers serving individual schools and their supervisors. Plant engineers, the head custodian, the custodians assigned to schools, and the groundskeepers assigned to schools. The next category is school level administration. $45.8 million, 5.7% of the budget. That's a principal, assistant principal, administrative assistant, school level director. For example, the people who lead our career centers are directors, not principals. The person who leads the Fine Arts Center is a director, not a principal. These are not district level directors. These are directors at a school location. The next category, school clerical. Obviously, clerical employees physically located at a school. Bookkeeper, school clerk, school secretary. The last two categories are district employees at $44.6 million, which is 5.4% of the budget, of the salary and fringe budget. You see there, individuals that will be listed as district employees. The very last category, the very smallest person that you can barely see, at $9.3 million out of that $795.8 million, at 1.3% is the district leadership. That's people at the district level that are directors and above. Another way to look at it is that 93.3% of the salary budget of that current $795.8 million is spent on people directly located, directly serving students in buildings every day. District personnel accounts for 6.7%. The non-salary budget, the largest items in that are fixed cost, utilities, liability toward insurance, annual software maintenance contracts, cellular wireless fees at 37%. The next largest at 21% is maintenance support, which would be purchase services, supplies, and small equipment for maintenance, building services, grounds, athletic fields, and security. The next largest one at 17% is instruction, and that would be instruction and instructional support, purchase services, supplies, equipment, dues for instructional functions, media services, pupil activities, field trips, curriculum development, and the supplies, materials, and equipment utilized at school level by administration, by counselors, by teachers. The other categories, much lesser in size, and one that will be completely closed out that you'll see later, 5% is payment to charter schools. The others are far less a component of the total spend. But again, that entire circle amounts to $68.4 million, or about 8% of the budget. It's also important for us to recognize and realize the initiatives and the improvements made over a 10-year period. One of the things that the administration frequently does and that the board has historically supported over time is to try to make improvements, sometimes in a gradual and staggered manner, so as not to undertake all the cost of an improvement or an addition at one time. Because every year we have the challenge of needing to meet growth with a student population that has grown variously over the years from 500 a year to over 1,200 a year. And to meet the demands of, if we live in an inflationary time, to offset the demands of inflation. So a lot of times the things that we do, we have to try to do them incrementally. So in the last 10 years, we've added 10 steps to the teacher salary schedule. The teacher base salary in 10 years has gone from $33,259 to the current $47,738. Our comparison in pay across the state, in that 10 years, we've moved from number 20 to number 4. We've reduced the student-teacher ratio across all grades with a strategic focus in first grade. We've increased the supplements paid to teachers for additional work to direct, supervise, and coach academic and athletic activities. We've undertaken an initiative to increase bus driver salaries, the area for which we have the greatest number of vacancies, the highest turnover, moving the starting pay in that period of time by nearly 63%. But still competing in an environment where a person that possesses the same credential to drive a bus can take that same commercial driver's license and get a job making $80,000, $90,000, and $100,000 a year. Ensure the elementary daily teacher planning time during the school day. Initiated the Greenville Alternative Teacher Education Program, which is a lateral entry program for those not trained as a teacher to train them in order for them to become a certified teacher. We've increased that by 600% in the first 6 years. Been able to establish a position of full-time athletic director at every high school, supervising the numerous athletic programs and the thousands of athletes at the high school level. Developed and implemented a flex allocation for instructional needs so that every school in this district, each principal in every school, with a base of 0.75 FTE, varying above that based on the size of the school, has the ability to utilize the funding with that position either to hire a teacher or other person to deliver instruction, or initiate some instructional program, or procure some instructional software that they believe meets the the needs of their local school community. Implemented an employee assistance program, providing assistance in many areas for all of our employees, whether they have the need for some counseling or some legal advice or any of a number of things. A highly used and well-regarded program from our employees' perspective. We've opened 5 new schools and centers, increased the student capacity at 9 other locations, and added 14 weight and multi-purpose rooms. Every one of those additions, save the last one of the weight rooms, required additional personnel because they're constructed to meet growth in student numbers. Maintained teachers when state funding ended for reduced class size and gifted programs. Maintained teachers and aides when state funding ended for English as a second language, now categorized as multilingual learners. Decreased multilingual learner student teacher ratio from 138 to 1 to 80 to 1. Established elementary reading interventionist positions and expanded those to meet data-driven needs. Relocated special education classes to home-based schools to put students in schools where their neighbors or siblings are in attendance. Added ongoing funding for band and strings instruments. Provided additional assistant director supplements for instrumental music based on the number of participants. Added assistant coaching supplements to multiple sports to provide competitive balance with athletic programs in other districts. Decreased the school counselor ratio at middle and high schools from 350 to 1 to 250 to 1, and decreased the elementary school ratios. Increased the clerical support for all schools by a base of 1 clerical person. Initiated the security zone patrol so that every one of our campuses that does not have a resident SRO is patrolled multiple times a day by a commissioned law enforcement officer. We targeted increases for employee work groups with critical shortages. Saw an earlier example of that with bus drivers. We have done that with other employee groups, our lowest wage employee groups, our nursing employees, to name 2 other examples. We've added interventionists before and after school tutoring, credit recovery labs, expanded summer school, and more to mitigate learning gaps. Added evolved systems, weapons detections, and the personnel to operate those systems. We've expanded the ARMS program to 2 sites and increased that program enrollment by 83% in 2 years, adding 190 students in grades 3 to 8 by locating programs more regionally convenient to parents and students throughout the district. As you look at the general fund budget recommended for consideration tonight, you see a $2,700 increase to every cell on the GCS teacher salary schedule. We believe, based on the information we have at this point, that would allow us to continue to maintain our 4th place ranking in the state. The information we've received to this point, we would not be able to reach 1, 2, or 3 with a reasonable requested increase in millage. We also have determined through survey of other districts that we believe right now there are 14 other districts positioned to move to a starting pay of $50,000. There's a step for every teacher. We've added a 36 teacher salary step so that every teacher would receive a step raise. That top end salary would be $104,665. That's a teacher with 36 years experience and a PhD or EDD, earned doctorate. The entry-level teacher salary in the recommended budget is $50,400. $503. We also propose an increase in the district minimum pay so that every job on the current salary schedule that has a wage range lower than $16.08 an hour would move to a base wage of $16.08. A step increase for all eligible employees at a minimum of 3.5%. We have step scales for other jobs beside teachers. The highest number of steps on any of those is about 14. None of them compare one-to-one with the teacher salary schedule. But we have people that are not at the top of their schedule. That would allow them to move up a step, and whatever the value of that step, we would ensure that it equals a minimum of 3.5%. Some of the steps are higher than that, some are less than that. The least one of those employees would get would be 3.5%. 3.5% for all the employees not eligible for a step. A 5% increase for nurses, which is 1.5 in addition to the 3.5, not 5% in addition to the 3.5, to continue to compensate those individuals in a manner that we believe, based on this year's experience of increasing their pay, will effectively improve our retention rate and our ability to recruit people into those jobs. Just as a note, inflation in FY23 was 8% and FY24 was 4.1%. To put those increases in a perspective of the inflationary environment that we currently are experiencing. I think the good news was in this quarter, this most recent inflation report indicated a stagnant rate of inflation. So at about that same 4.1%. It also includes funding for student growth. It also includes completing the internal salary inequity adjustment for district level employees. Those same step schedules, there were a number of years that we did not give a step raise to district level employees or anybody else that's on one of those step schedules. So we've recommended for, I believe now, 3 years consecutively, and the board's approved 2 of those, this being the 3rd one, to catch those people up so that we don't have people coming in new to the district making more than someone who may have been here in their job as long as having the same number of years in their job as the people bring in with experience from the outside. Funding to meet the required employer contribution for health insurance. That's the second half of last year's increase because that runs from January to December. And the first half of next year's increase, which I believe is around 10%. Permanent substitute teachers at all schools. That was something we were able to fund through ESSER. I believe one of the teachers that spoke earlier spoke about permanent substitutes. It allowed us to have one in every school in the district. This carries that forward in the general fund budget to continue to be able to have one at every school in the district so that principals know the first absence of the day is covered. That by having that person there every day, that helps offset the ability to get enough substitutes. And they still struggle to find enough substitutes. Ultimately, that can result in teachers having to take on additional responsibilities, either by splitting up a class and taking a certain number of students from that class or giving up part of their planning period. Tools for teacher hiring and retention, they're more specifically spelled out. For example, there's some AI software in there. I think it's around $100,000 investment that would allow, based on our teachers' experience with it this year, at a time when it was free to us, greatly cuts their time in many routine tasks. Continued expansion of the GATE program, funding for school safety and security, increased resources for students with disabilities and multilingual learners, additional intervention teachers and supports for students to ensure that we continue to have interventionists to meet the needs of our students that have not fully regained where they need to be. Athletic trainers, traditionally, up until last year, Prisma paid 100% of that. They informed us last year they would no longer fund 100% of that. There's a recommendation in there last year approved in the budget, and the one again this year for a next step increase to our contribution for those trainers. We also included as a new initiative base funding to support school-level student activities. Like all the other things that we purchase and procure, the cost to operate student activities, those things borne still by the school level, funded out of gate revenue for the most part, or community fundraisers or booster clubs. It's becoming more and more expensive to provide what's needed to operate those school activities. That could be athletics, it could be the arts, it could be other extracurricular programs that occur at the school level. And there is a proposal in there to provide some per pupil funding at elementary, middle, and high school level. And that funding chart provides a base amount, and it is tempered by the poverty level of the school, recognizing that some communities have a greater ability to raise funds in the community than others. That is a new initiative. Summer school, continuing to see uptick. For example, this year our current enrollment in summer school appears to be about the same number as last year. That summer school is in this year's budget because it will conclude by the end of June. This is for the FY25 summer school to serve elementary and provide transportation to those and provide service at middle and high school that is not necessarily in person, for which we provide no transportation. We're adding the final grade level at Fountain Inn High School, small number of personnel to open the new elementary school, 2 bilingual attendance supervisors, 2 carpenters, 5.5 custodians simply to meet the allocation formula we have for custodians because we added square footage in the custodial allocations based on the square footage of the building. Fire and burglar alarm technician, we've added tremendous numbers of systems, and they are increasingly complex. An ETS system specialist to help them with the backlog of work in ETS. Academic, operational, and business increases to offset inflation. Preventative maintenance for grounds and maintenance. District-wide technology contract cost increases, as well as some contracts that previously were E-rate eligible but no longer are. Software for energy management and procurement. There are some reductions I mentioned earlier. That sliver to charter school payments will not be in the FY25 budget because the last remaining charter through the district has opted to move to the state charter district, a financial benefit to the school as well as a financial benefit to our district. We've shut down the Overbrook Child Development location and reassigned those classes out into schools in close proximity or in the school to which those children are zoned. We have moved the early college program from a standalone facility to being housed as a program in 3 of our high schools, reducing the operating costs, and we have already seen a substantial increase in enrollment in that program. So those are the summary points of what's included in the expenditures. Now, we've had a considerable amount of discussion. We've had questions asked. We've shared answers to those to the board following the workshop and following first reading. There's several of those, though, I think we want to draw some attention to. One of the things that there has been discussion about is how we end each year. We have revenue in excess of expense. And we're always going to recommend a budget where we believe that we will expend between 98 and 99% of that budget. if we set our goal to expend 100%, we can run too close to the edge and go over, and go into the red. We could have a slight dip in revenue that might cause that, but more likely, over expenditure. We don't want to be in that position. Now that money doesn't go away, doesn't fail to be used, and in fact, used in a manner that helps offset any future tax increases. I'll explain a little bit more about that later on. But what you see here is a look back to 2013, every fiscal year since. The last 3 years have been highly unusual. And the fourth one, 20, fairly unusual. So if you look from 2013 to 2019, you will see that the variance between the original budget for that year and the expenditures ranged from 0.8% to a high of 1.8%. I believe the average in those years was 1.2, which means we spent 98.8% of our budget in all those years. All right, when you look at 20, some of you will probably recall that on a Sunday afternoon in March, the governor ordered every school in the state of South Carolina to be closed. And they remain closed until the summer, the beginning of the next school year. So we realized tremendous savings in utility costs, substitute cost, custodial services, transportation services, zone patrols. We also got a small amount, I believe about $7.5 million in CARES Act funding. Now that pales into comparison to what we ultimately got in ESSER funding. So we ended that year with about 2.4% of expenditures being under the original budget. The next 3 years, we saw a tremendous infusion of ESSER funds and still had reduced expenditures. For example, in 21, where we recommended no additional millage increase, we did place holds on allocations throughout our budget with the approval of the board when they passed that budget. Because we didn't know. Think about back to the uncertainty of the pandemic. We didn't know what was going to happen. There was every reason to believe that that pandemic might cause the local and state economy to nosedive. We didn't know that going into it. So we froze a number of expenditures. You may recall we did not have everybody in school every day. There were no staff developments held, no conferences attended, little to no out-of-district travel, a myriad of reasons the amount we saved increased. We also had expenditures we made that were already in our general fund budget where we could transfer that expense, move the bill over to the ESSER funds and pay it out of ESSER funds, still leaving that amount in our budget. In FY 22, again, no millage increase. The majority of the categories underspent had to do with the infusion of ESSER dollars, and also we had significant issues with recruiting and retaining people in jobs throughout the district. That continued into 23, though we made progress in filling vacancies, we still had an infusion of ESSER dollars. That will happen again at the conclusion of this year. Probably won't be as great an amount. We've had a much higher success with filling positions. But we still used ESSER dollars to pay for eligible items that were already budgeted in our general fund budget. Now, we could have taken those dollars and put them in the general fund budget and reduce the general fund budget. And however many of those dollars we chose to do that, I believe over time we used over $100 million, to transfer expense. So if you figured that over the 3 years of ESSER, we'd have created a $30 million hole every year if we'd have reduced the budget. And the year it expired, there'd have been this big gaping $30 million hole to be filled either by cutting. You saw the amount that people are in our budget, they're 92% of it. Cutting people or cutting services. But that was not the path that we recommended, nor that our board took. We took the more conservative approach, transferring those expenses so that the money that was saved in those years could be applied to some other things. And I'll share those with you in just a minute. But the important message there, the budget that you have presented to you all tonight for consideration is based on the same philosophy and the same preparation and the same type of estimates as the ones that resulted in the variance from 2013 to 2019. Right inside that target area, and in fact, leaning closer to 99% than 98%. So those funds from ESSER, we've used, they become fund balance. That money that's generated, revenue in excess of expense from any year, goes into the fund balance. And every year in the winter, after the auditors have finished the external audit of our books, we make a recommendation to the board to utilize some amount of the fund balance, realizing that there's a board policy that requires a certain percent be retained always. And that amount goes up every year because it's a percent, and if the budget goes up, that amount goes up. There's an amount above that that we know we have to have cash flow in the first half of the fiscal year. And it's an amount greater than that percent calls for. If we did not have that amount, sometime in October, we'd have to borrow money to get us to the big local tax revenue receipts that we receive in January and February. You borrow money, pay interest on it. We'd be having to spend taxpayer dollars to pay interest on borrowing that money. So there's a level that we need to maintain the cash flow that we have to pay our commitments. Those commitments being the salaries of our employees and the invoices we incur from businesses for the goods and services that we procure. But even so, we're going to have some amount over that. Well, the last 3 years, and the year we're ending will be an exception as well. We have had exceptional amounts to be able to recommend the board utilize. So you can see in these categories where some of those funds were expended. New instructional software, band and orchestra equipment, staff bonuses during the pandemic, which totaled $20.3 million, to recognize the significant effort put forth by all of our employees throughout the district. The Elevate program, incentive pay, money to compensate our teachers for letters and Read to Succeed training that takes place outside their normal workday. That's $5.5 million to do that. Security enhancements, and you see those listed at $13 million. Additional classroom instruction, greenhouse, animal science barn, $1.5 million spent on CTE enhancements. Capital equipment. We made the commitment several years ago to replace the practice of schools having to buy their activity buses and maintain them. A new activity bus can cost about $98,000. We accelerated the replacement of those buses with district-provided buses for about $1.9 million. But the big one is the next one. Board-approved projects in the capital improvement program, ADA playground updates, LED lighting upgrades, additions to school buildings to accommodate growth, accelerating the addition of weight rooms at the high schools, construction of replacement school buildings, offsetting cost increases for construction due to inflation. In a 6-month period, this past year, school construction costs went from $320 a square foot to $350 a square foot inside 6 months. Accelerating projects based on changes in population projections and expanding the scope of projects. $268 million. We've enabled 13 school projects to be accelerated and shortened the timeline for the capital improvement projects from 2036 to 2034. Both Woodland Elementary and Fountain Inn High, for example, the fund balance was utilized to offset inflationary cost increases, to accelerate the timeline due to growth, and to expand the project scope, resulting in additional capacity up to 1,400 at Woodland, adding about 100 to the original proposed scope, and 1,250 at Fountain Inn, adding 250 to the original proposed scope there. None of those accelerations would have been possible without the utilization of fund balance. So to accelerate those projects, and if you're familiar with Woodland or Fountain Inn, the population is there now. Would have required postponing other projects or raising the capital budget, the debt service tax millage rate. So cost avoidance and avoidance of a tax increase. Additionally, we mentioned earlier that LED lighting project, $14 million to complete that. That's one reason we were able to remove the increase to the utility budget originally proposed in the workshop version of this budget. By moving forward on that, we'll reduce our energy consumption to help offset the continuing rate increases we're experiencing. It's relatively easy to predict expenditures. Now, it requires a lot of work to go through that process. I think those are the books right over there, Stephanie. Morgan, would you hold those up? Those two books represent the considerations. Well, that's just one of them. Those represent the items considered for inclusion in the budget beyond the items that are currently in the budget. So as you might imagine, that's a very time-consuming process to go through that, evaluate it, and come forward. And there's not a waste of money in there. Those are all reasonable, viable things that ought to be considered. But we have parameters around what we have to do. We were reminded earlier by a speaker about being considerate of those that fund this, and we try to be extremely considerate of that. Because everybody sitting in this room is also one of the people that funds this. We want to clear up in a minute and make sure everybody understands, though, exactly where that money does come from. So that part, we try to end up with what we think will be a reasonable budget. The part that is even more difficult to project is the revenue. So when we present a budget at the workshop, we generally don't even like to attach a millage amount to it if we're considering a rate increase. We do talk about the difference, because years ago we didn't talk about the difference, and as soon as we brought that out, people started doing this, trying to figure out what it was. So we go ahead and say what the difference is. And we may look at it, all right, well, a current mill is worth this. A mill is a rate of taxation. It is equal to 1/1000th of a dollar, 1 mil. 1/1000th of a dollar. So the value of the property, what it's appraised for, times a percentage for non-owner occupied is 6%, times the millage rate. Well, 1 mil would be 0.001. When we go into first reading, we've got a feel for what revenue will look like. We're very fortunate we're in a growing environment. So our revenue has increased basically every year for the last several years. Now, not with absolute predictability. I'll show you that in just a minute. So we start looking at it and putting a value on it. Well, we have people in finance that follow tax revenue on a weekly basis all year long. You can follow it on a daily basis. There's not much point in following it on a daily basis, but you can. They can do that, and they have done that in the last couple of months as we got closer to the end. So based on the trend we saw earlier in the year and the fact that the last 2.5 months support that trend, when we moved from first reading, where we recommended a millage increase of 3.8 mils to fund the difference between revenue and proposed expense, we felt comfortable with increasing what we estimate to be the value of a mill for next year. So what we're sharing tonight is the estimate that we have of what, quite honestly, next June's tax revenue will look like. What all can happen in that year. So it is not an absolute certainty when you do that prediction. Being an election year makes it especially volatile. Right now, the Fed's keeping interest rates at a high level. If they move those rates up or down, it can have an immediate and sometimes dramatic effect on the economy. So we try to watch all of those things. But any revenue that we end up with in excess of expense is provided to the board to utilize for one-time or non-recurring expenditures. We've been doing that for quite a few years, and it's worked very well. What it means is, but this bill value increase, what it means is fewer mills are now necessary to be levied to balance the budget. We rarely change it substantively between the first reading and the second reading. In fact, only one other time in the last maybe 20 years have we moved revenue predictions from first reading to second reading, and that really had to do with the change at the state level, not with local revenue. But we're defying what one might expect in the growth of local tax revenue. But here's the problem. So if you start back at 2013 and you look to 2023, this is the value of a tax mill increase. So if you look at how much it went up, if you look at 13, 14, 15, and 16, you'd think, well, that's pretty easy to predict. It went up the amount it went up the year you were in, and the next year it went up a little bit more. But look what happens in 2017. The mill value still increases, but it doesn't increase 4%, it increases 2%. Then if you look at 18, it barely gets above 2%. Then in 19, it rockets up to 4.5%. Then in 20, it drops down to about 2.5%. Then it jumps way up to 8% in 21, then over 10% in 22, and then what happens to it in 23? It still increases, but not 10%, it increases 4%. So it is very challenging to predict and project what local tax revenue will be for the coming year. Now, the good news in that whole slide is it didn't drop below 2%, and it never went to zero. So there was some increase. While a set amount of millage is levied by the Board of Trustees, the actual amount of the local revenue the district receives over the course of the following year from that millage is estimated in the budget. With 27 days remaining in the fiscal year, we're on track to end FY24 with a balance positive $17 million. This positive balance has informed our estimated valuation of cumulative millage for FY25, that is all the mills added together, by $26,229,000, with the value of a single mill going from $1,661,000 to $1,828,000. Fund balance, as a reminder, is non-recurring. This does not utilize fund balance. Now, that $17 million that's showing up this year, it's more money than we budgeted. So the point to this is we're using that to inform the amount we have next year. In fact, we've moved it from 17 to 22. That 17's still sitting there. It'll be sitting there in the fall. The auditors close the books. So comment or suggestion has been made, well, let's use that. All right, here's what happens if you use that. If you take that $17 million and you add it to the budget that's already funded by allowing that to be considered in the tax millage, that's fine. You'd have it next year. You'd have an extra $17 million for 25. In 26, you'd have a $17 million hole, necessitating a substantial tax increase or steep cuts in order to balance the budget in that year. It's not a good fiscal practice, nor is a reasonable approach to ensuring the stability of an organization or for business owners, individual taxpayers, parents and guardians, or district employees. You don't want the tax rate jumping up and down. A modest increase people can account for, budget for. In a minute, we'll talk about how that actually looks on an individual. You also don't want employees concerned about whether they're going to have a job or not, or whether they may be not get a pay raise at all, other than that mandated by the state. You don't want parents and guardians and students, for that matter, to be concerned about we're not going to have this program next year, or not going to have that program, because $17 million is a huge hole to fill, knowing that every year we're going to grow, which requires more people. We're going to have mandates from the state, which are never fully funded by the state. In fact, the entire system of finance that we're operating under is predicated on a state and local share. And every year we get a letter from the State Department of Administration, state agency, that says, based on the population increase and inflation, we should raise X number of mills. This year, that recommendation was to raise millage by how much, Robin?
10.2.
10.2 mills. This whole system is predicated on there's a state portion and a local share. But stability is something we certainly strive for in finance, and it is also helpful to the people that have to pay this bill, obviously. Allowing the $17 million in additional revenue generated this fiscal year to roll into fund balance enables the board to address unanticipated needs, fund non-recurring cost of equipment or other necessary purchases, mitigate excessive inflation currently being experienced in building projects, and or accelerate projects in the long-range facilities plan capital improvement program. You saw two examples of that earlier, Fountain Inn High School, Woodland Elementary, to continue ensuring facility space is sufficient for ongoing growth. But one example that just recently was discussed and funds were set aside to begin to pay for, our enterprise resource planning software. That's the software system that is the operational backbone of the finance and human resources processes and record keeping in the district. It was replaced in 2011, 2010. It is no longer, it's obsolete. They don't support it to the degree it needs to be supported anymore, and it's not adaptable to meet our current needs. It's got to be replaced. The board voted at our recommendation earlier this year to go ahead and set aside $11.5 million in fund balance towards that anticipated cost of $28 million. Now that's based on the preliminary looking at what we will need to have and what other people are paying for similar systems. Interestingly enough, that $17 million carried forward from 24 would be sufficient to fund its current estimated replacement cost. We'll have to replace that system. So the difference between 11.5 and its ultimate price tag, if that's 28 million, will have to come from somewhere. So this is an example of avoiding either cutting something, pushing something out in the capital budget, or increasing taxes. Basically, we're using, one way to look at this, you could use that 17 million, now you dig in this huge hole to fund a budget now, or you could use it to prevent things from appearing in the budget later. Otherwise, you'd have to fund it through the general fund budget or the sale of bonds. That's one example. There are many other things like that. We had adopted a philosophy a number of years ago of removing and not placing into the general fund budget anything that we could remove that was non-recurring, and request the board annually to fund that through fund balance or shift those things that were eligible to the capital budget. Now, obviously, all this got to be paid for. And I think this simply summarizes what we've said to you, but I think it's important to make these points. We've consistently recommended, and the board has traditionally approved, the strategy of minimizing to the point of almost total elimination non-recurring expenses being charged in the general fund. Non-recurring expenses are both legitimate and necessary for the operation of the district. However, we've taken the conservative two-pronged approach of funding allowable non-recurring expenditures from the capital budget, example equipment or projects that extend the life of facilities, and the utilization of a previous year's general fund revenue in excess of expense or fund balance. This approach allows funds already collected to be used to procure these necessary items without reliance on the general fund budget, necessitating additional tax increases. It's conservative in its approach in that it does not cause the district to run the risk of exceeding its general fund budget. But all this has to be paid for somewhere. So we need to make sure everybody understands where the money comes from. A huge portion of our local tax revenue comes from vehicle taxes. This is an example we use. The three most commonly purchased vehicles in the country: Ford F-150, Toyota Camry, and Nissan Altima. The average age of one of those, any of the three, owned right now by a person in South Carolina, more specifically by a person in the two congressional districts that comprise our school district, is a 2011 model. In 2023, the tax on that 2011 Camry was $19.20. This year, it was $18.80. With the proposed tax increase, it'll be $18.03. Now, some of you have a somewhat quizzical look. How can that be? The mystifying part is how the overall tax revenue keeps going up, and we'll explain what we believe to be the reason for that in a minute. The reason it goes down is any millage increase of less than about 7%, a millage increase of less than 7%, results in you paying the same as you paid this year or less, because there is a statute that requires the value of that car to be no more than the value of it, than 95% of the value of it the previous year. Hence, the tax on that car goes down even when we add millage. Now, if you didn't add the 1.5 mils, it would go down more than from 1880 to 1803. All right, on your home, for example, you hear people talk about the high property tax I pay on my home. We pay no property tax to the school district for operating purposes on the home that we live in. If we own it, or more commonly for most all of us would be the bank and I own it, bank and you own it. So owner-occupied home. Here's how much you pay for operating taxes to the school district. 0. Now, if it's a second home, you pay on the value times 6% times the millage rate. If it's a second home, but not the home that you declare as your primary residence if it is an owner-occupied home. You do pay debt service taxes on it to the school district, but not operating taxes. If you look on your tax bill for your home, there's a credit on it. That credit is the amount that tax would have been for operating purposes. So who does pay it? Businesses pay it. So here's the impact on 4 businesses. We've used these 4 examples for a number of years. There's the tax value of the property. There's the amount that 1.5 mils would increase their annual tax bill, and then the amount it would be per month. Now, what's also interesting to note, if you've got really good vision, you can see that note at the very bottom, per the assessor's office, the assessed value. So you can pick one of those where it's $277.20 or $753,860. The assessed value may actually represent 50 to 95% of the true value. The longer the person or entity that owns it has owned it, the less the assessed value. Because the statute in South Carolina caps the value of a piece of property from going up more than 15% when property is reassessed, and by law, it's reassessed every 5 years. So there's great disparity in what 2 people that own the same business located in the same kind of building might pay based on how long they've owned that property. The same would be true in the next example. You also pay in rental property. So here's 4 examples that are a cross-section of representative rental properties. There's an apartment complex downtown Greenville. There's an apartment complex, Woodruff Road area. There is a rental house, the White Horse Road area, and a rental house in the Greer area. You see the tax value for each of those properties. The first apartment complex is valued at $30.8 million. The second one, $22.9. The rental house, $134. Rental house, $50,000. You see the monthly amount that would impact the owner and the annual amount. But then we've also translated that into what would that be per apartment or per house. So per tenant, the annual amount and a monthly amount. So the apartment complex downtown Greenville annually, $13.82, $1.15 per tenant per month on a $30.8 million apartment complex per tenant. That rental house in Greer, $457 annually, 38 cents a month. Same note at the bottom of that. Those properties can be valued between 50 to 95% of their actual appraised value. So you could imagine in some communities, if you went into a community, a lot of communities around area that houses may be built in the 1950s. You could literally have two houses sitting side by side, the same amount of square footage, built very much the same, look very much alike, same kind of construction, both brick or frame, whatever they might be. And if one person owns one rental house and they've owned it for 40 years or 30 years, it might be valued at 50% of its actual value. If you just bought the rental property next door, 95% its value. So there are disparities, great disparities between what people pay. So to say that it has an impact of this amount to every individual, it's very difficult to say that. So we'll give you a range of that. You also pay tax on machinery and that sort of thing, and this shows acceleration of depreciation. So while your taxes may be increasing in one area, depreciation may allow you tax credits or tax reductions in another area. Where that really comes into play is the depreciation from income tax purposes or for income tax purposes for a building. While for property tax purposes, it may appreciate in value, for income tax purposes, it will depreciate in value. So you may get an offsetting amount because it's now 1 year older on the income side. Again, you can't work these as one-to-one examples, but it just gives you an idea of it's not the total picture. So in summary, this budget recognizes the importance of teaching and non-teaching employees through pay increases to maintain our competitive status. It meets all mandates. It addresses growth in student numbers. It maintains all current staffing levels by formula and provides improvement to special ed and ML. It provides adjustments for inflation in services and supplies. It enhances student employee safety and security. And it does fund some very few in comparison to the overall general fund budget, and certainly in comparison to the ESSER funding, a few funding items critical to continued student success and continuity. Now, Dr. Stiles, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Royster, and thank you for that very thorough review. Yes, Mr. Sailors.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the recommendation of the administration for the fiscal 24-25 budget.
A second.
Mr. Sailors has made a motion. It has been seconded by Ms. Morrison-Fair. Are there additional questions? Ms. Middleton?
If I understand this. So you said that the local revenue is changing, you think, and that originally in the first reading, the millage was 3.5. And
Yes.
now it's going down because we anticipate that the millage is going to be valued higher.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So what happens if it doesn't? If something happens in the economy, the federal inflation rate, and we end up
We're confident that absent a catastrophic event, that we're good with this. Now, if you have an unforeseen catastrophic event, if there were all kind of red flags out there right now and we were ignoring them, that'd be problematic. There aren't any out there. There's concern because of the uncertain environment around the economy. For one, we're way overdue for there to be a dip in the economy. Everybody's anticipating this dip in the economy, and it hadn't occurred. If you look back cyclically over years, it's time for one, for lack of a better explanation. But if it's something no one could foresee, then we do have the ability to come back and ask you to temporarily fund items out of fund balance. We would also halt expenses. In other words, anything that we could stop spending, we would. So we would do things to mitigate that if there were this totally unforeseen plunge in the economy. But right now, that fraction of the about 2%. That's a cushion there. We know it's there. We can make that cushion go up by stopping doing certain things. We got to continue to repair buildings, but we can stop travel. We can stop staff development that has an external cost to it. There are a lot of things we can do if we see something about to happen. But we feel as comfortable as we can feel with this amount. We also right now are bringing in fairly high level of interest income. It's extremely volatile though. So we don't want to rely on that to project, but we should get additional interest income. But interest income in like a 6-month window, the amount of that doubled in a 6-month window, but it could drop by half in a 6-month window. So we don't use that in calculating projection for local revenue. Well, we have it in there, but it's at a minimal amount, and you'll see it in there. So we like I said, they looked at this daily recently. We don't have the summary end of May report from the county yet, because you don't get it till the 15th of the month. But based on we have the summary report for the end of April, which we got May the 15th, and everything after that is trending the same way. So we wouldn't bring this forward to you if we didn't feel comfortable this was a reasonable but conservative projection of mill value.
Thank you, Ms. Middleton. Mr. Cochran.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say I'm 100% in favor of keeping the raises that are included in our budget for our teachers and all of our other employees. 100% in favor of keeping all of those raises. Having said that, I'm still at a total loss in figuring out why we need a tax increase. That $2.742 million that we anticipate will be raised by raising taxes amounts to only 0.3% of our total budget. We aren't saying we need 10% of our budgeted money from a tax increase, not 10, not 5, not 1, not even 0.5%. We're saying we need 0.3%. Could we please go back for just a minute to page 22 from the presentation there? Thank you. Again, we need 0.3%. There is no year from 2013 to 2023, not a single year, where we have ever been that close to using up the budget, not 0.3%. So I feel quite sure, going back to what Ms. Doolin had said at our earlier budget meeting, when we did the first reading, that we could easily find 0.3% somewhere in that budget. In what year did we begin to use some of our fund balance as part of our budget, and how much of our fund balance was used for the budget that particular year?
Just to answer or to respond to your first statement, I would refer really to the answer that I gave Ms. Middleton. We've stretched what we believe the value of a mill should be to the point beyond which we don't believe we should stretch it. So while that might only be 0.3%, in 2015, that would have been 1/3 of the variance. In 2019, that would have been 1/3 of the variance. So that's why we don't feel comfortable with just saying 0. If the board does not want to approve a 1.5 mil increase, we would come back and recommend to the board that certain things be removed from the budget.
I I'm fine with that. I certainly am fine with that. I would not, as I said, I do not think we should remove the teacher raises, the employee raises, and I realize, as you said, that's a large percentage of it. But I find trouble believing that in all the other things, especially going back to, and I would invite anybody to go back and listen to the comments that Ms. Doolin made at the first budget meeting, when we had our first reading, I really find it hard to believe that we could not find 0.3% somewhere in there. But
And I guess my response to that, to make sure I completely answered your question, yeah, we'll find it by removing expense, not by further enhancing the value of the mill. We do not feel comfortable further enhancing the value of the mill.
Right. I am certainly fine with that.
As to your question regarding the use of fund balance, it was most recently used 4 years ago. We committed in a year. The reason we did this was the uncertainty of the impact of the pandemic on the economy. We requested a 0% mill increase, and we utilized
22.9 million in a first reading in FY
$22.9 million with a stated payback period of 5 years. We currently have, in the year we're in, a reliance on
4.1 million.
for the year we're
This year,
we're in.
8.3, sorry.
We're currently in an 8.3 reliance. The budget cuts that to 4.1, which would leave 4.1 to be removed next year, to be consistent with what we have publicly said and what our auditors would look at and expect us to do. The only other time that we've utilized fund balance as a means to balance the general fund budget would have been in the 2010 budget, in the midst of the recession, and we utilized, Robin, do you recall the exact amount?
I do not have it. I think it was around 12 million.
I was thinking 17, but
17.
regardless of the amount, we used it as a stopgap to give us a year to reduce expense through attrition. We cut $72 million out of the general fund budget in basically a 2-year period of time, and we did that without cutting any person. We cut a bunch of jobs. We didn't cut any people. But we used that fund balance to carry us, basically allowing us to take cuts in arrears so nobody lost their job. Those are the 2 times we've utilized it. It is not a sound fiscal practice to continually rely on that to balance a recurring budget with non-recurring revenue. That's why we've adopted the strategy of pulling non-recurring expenses and asking them to be funded by the board through fund balance. I believe that answered the question, if I remembered each of your questions.
Right. And so we're saying it's not a good sound fiscal policy, and yet we've done it the last several years. But my 22.9, that was the original amount that we took out. Can you tell me what it was the following couple of years that we took out, please?
First reading, it was 22.9, but we came back a second reading and reduced it to 14.7 million for FY 22. 23, kind of the same scenario. We ended up with 13.3 million as the funding source, and then this year, again, it was 8.3 million for 24.
Thanks. So at the moment, we're down to where once we take this 4.1, how many years do we have left to totally decrease our dependence on the fund balance?
FY 26.
Okay. So in 1 year there, we basically decreased our fund balance by a little over $8 million. But then the next year, we only decreased it from 14.7 to 13.3. So 1.4 million is all we decreased it that year. Now, This year, we are asking again, I think, for 4.15 to come out of the fund balance, 4.15 million. If we took the 4.15 million and added the 2.742 that we plan on getting by raising taxes, we still would only be at $6.892 million, which would still be right in line with that decrease when we went from 14.7 to 13.3. This year, we would be going from 8.3 to 6.892. There would be no tax increase. We would still be reducing our dependence on the fund balance, and we would still have 1 year or 2 years to decrease, 1 year after that to drop it. And again, we would be dropping it at that point from this year. If we went to 6.892, we would be basically dropping it, of course, eventually to zero. But there again, we made an $8 million drop back from the first year to the second year, from that 22.9 to that 14.7. So if we made an $8 million drop then, I'm quite sure with all the talented people we have around here, we could make a 6.892 million drop in time to decrease our dependence on the fund balance as we're supposed to do.
And I certainly appreciate the reference to talented people. Our concern with that would be next year you got to end 6.892 instead of the 4.1. So you got to end it at some point. So you could very well be looking at a tax increase next year to get rid of the 6.892, because we have no idea what mandated expenditures we'll have next year. So we believe it's better to try to split that difference. What you might want to do is look back in that same year that we reduced our dependence by $8 million. What was the millage increase that year, Robin? That offset that. In the following year, we increased millage how much?
4.5 mils.
So we're at a point, it's kind of like the guy digging that hole. There's a hole there. We can either fill more of it this year or more of it next year. Right now, we know what next year, meaning for 26. Right now, we reasonably know what 25 will look like. We have no idea what 26 will look like. So again, if the board chooses not to increase the 1.5 mils, we have some items that we recommend to you they be removed from the budget. And that's certainly the board's decision to not increase taxes 1.5 mils.
Well, I know out in the economy out in our community right now is certainly not the best ever. I think I would prefer to deal with the here and now and take the hypothetical tax increase as it comes, if it does come. Number 5, I'd like to point out that while I think it was mentioned a few minutes ago that the FY24 inflation rate was 4.1%, but from last year to this year, our budget has increased over $58 million, which is a 6.7% increase.
And I guess I would point out in response to that point, a considerable amount of that increase was not employee salary increases to offset inflation. And it also was not money put in to offset inflation for supplies and materials. It was actually to fund mandated costs. Generally speaking, I believe there was a 1% increase to retirement contribution, as well as a mandated health care coverage increase. So to look at how much the budget in total went up is not to say that that amount went into employee salaries to help our employees offset inflation, even though last year's increase, I believe for non-teaching employees was 3.5%. For teachers, it averaged being around 5%, still well below the rate of inflation.
If we vote to raise taxes again this year, how many years in a row will that be that we've raised taxes as a school board? 3 in a row? counting this year if we. voted
3
to
of
do it.
5,
But 3 in a row.
yes.
Again, to me, 0.3% of our budget is all that tax increase would fund. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you, Dr. Stiles.
Thank you, Mr. Cochran. Ms. LaVentus Wells?
Thank you, Dr. Stiles. A budget is always difficult. When I worked, the president of the college said, you have a budget, you stay within your budget. You make cuts, you make it work. I would always have to make those harsh decisions, what I would do without in order to stay within my budget. And I would present it to whether it was Dr. Barton or Dr. Miller, but I always stayed within my budget and didn't overextend. I did not allow to get top heavy or put things in that maybe weren't necessarily needed at that moment. But I'll tell you one thing, every teacher, every employee in this district deserves their raises, and they deserve their step increases. And if you brought me that budget and had everything in there, and I would even put more money into aids, special aids, special needs aids, and getting a program where substitute teachers would be able to get certified in a reasonable time. Because I hear from people that want to be substitutes, but they have to wait so many months until that program is offered. Everybody in here, kudos to you. Thank you for doing all that you do for our children, our students, and our schools, our parents. Thank you. Thank you, security, because safety is a priority. But I am going to agree with Mr. Cochran. There's got to be some things, and I'm not going to point them out, but I can see a few things that maybe we need to reevaluate because I don't feel at this point they're needed. When, Dr. Royster, I feel like you must have seen one of my tax notices. A house I grew up in and is vacant, and I'm the owner. But the taxes that I pay to the school district is $2,772. You would consider it a rental property. It is not rented. It has sat there vacant, and I go there every day. And we also pay on our homes. Robin, don't ask me how, but you might want to use a different vehicle because in that carport, I have a Camry that is a 2003, and in 2023, it was $9.94 that went to the school. And in 2024, it went up to $10.39. So it increased instead of decrease. And I could go on with, my Volvo. $264 to the district. That's a 2018 car. What I'm saying to you is if I'm paying this, and this did not take into account city taxes, county taxes, do Power's going to raise theirs? The difference between Duke Power and the district is we have success stories. But you go down Wade Hampton Boulevard, 291, the intersection, you'll see posts, and if you remember years ago, they stated, we want this increase, we're going to put everything underground. Well, you go down the 291, Wade Hampton Academy, and you'll see a broken post that has 2 posts on the side of it that are wrapped in tape. How nice does that look? Or you see all of these wires drooping. What we have are students that are flourishing. So why would I not want to give all of you a pay increase? I would. Hands down, that's the way it is. But what I'm saying is people cannot be hit with more and more taxes. They just can't right now. Food's gone up. Small businesses weren't here tonight. I had several that contacted me, Linda, don't do this to us again. I said, well, you need to come and you need to talk. And they said, how can we? We can't get people to work. We're doing 2 or 3 jobs in our restaurants. We can't get away. So that's where we are. And to approve this millage increase, not knowing what's going to happen in Columbia because they haven't voted on the budget, I just don't feel right in approving a 1 point or whatever millage increase. So I'm going to agree with Mr. Cochran. And I'm not voting against teacher. If you just put all of this in a motion for teacher and employees of the district across the board, I'd vote on that right now. And then if you want to do another amended motion where we look at cutting for the rest, that's fine. But I'm just not feeling right voting on a budget that we don't know what Columbia's going to do. We think we might know what they do, but once again, they're waiting till after the primaries in order to make their decision. Well, isn't that convenient? Again, because they give us mandates, but they don't fund them. So I'm sorry, but that's the way I feel. And but I will approve whatever there is for teachers and staff and everybody across the board and all those that make this happen, where I can turn this computer on in this room and it works. And that we can go live everywhere where people can watch. So thank y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leventis Wells. Ms. Mosley.
Thank you. I didn't know I was going to be next. Okay. Dr. Royster, I have questions based on what I've heard from our first 3 board members. If we don't approve this budget tonight, and I echo everything they say, I think teachers and staff deserve what's been proposed. What gets cut?
If you don't,
and then wait, and what's the consequence of cutting it?
okay.
Because it's not just what gets cut. I'd like to know what impact that has on ultimately our students.
If the motion fails as put forward and seconded, we would request the chair take a break for 15, 20 minutes maybe, while we go out and prepare a alternative submission. Make sure we have the details of that correct and the amounts correct. But right now, what that would look like is if you go to the wrong direction. There is The fourth bullet down, permanent substitute teachers at all schools. We would recommend that item be deleted.
Oh, of all the things.
Now, because we got to find $2.742 million. We'd recommend that item be deleted and that the substitute budget itself be increased in an amount to allow for the employment of one non-certified sub on a daily basis, not as a permanent employee, to ensure that we have some additional coverage. We haven't increased the amount of the sub budget except for the amount of their wage increase in more than 4 years. And for 3 years, we've had a permanent sub at every school. So that would result in some savings. We would remove the increase for instructional materials. We would remove the fire and burglar alarm technician 1.0 FTE. We would remove the ETS system specialist 1.0 FTE. We would remove the carpenter position 1.0 FTE. We would remove the entire proposal to support pupil activities at the school level. And we would remove the additional increase of 1.5% for clinical licensed non-exempt salary schedule, i.e. the nurse schedule. And they would still receive a 3.5% raise like all other employees. Those items would total the 2.742.
Thank you, Dr. Royster, for sharing that.
Okay, hold on. Sorry, I was trying to write down. What page is that on? Okay. So you're saying you would remove all of these to meet that, is it 2.7 million deficit that we're?
2.742.
Okay.
Now, again, we'd convert some of that allocation for permanent subs into a line item to add to the sub account.
Okay, so that's what I was kind of confused
So it
about the
wouldn't be
math.
the complete savings of that
Okay.
amount.
Okay. So then, hold on.
Now, I think,
And I can't add up the rest of them that fast because they're on multiple different pages. But does that give us exactly that 2.7?
it would put us to 2.74. Like I said, we'd want to step
With
out,
the adjustment in
put
the
that together,
Right,
and provide a summary sheet for it.
okay.
I need to hear that.
So is there any other opportunity with it? And I mean, I know in some of the responses we received to the questions that some of the board has asked, we've received, there's been identification of line items, and we've received the fact that if we looked at every single line item, it would be 555 pages, I believe. And is there any other opportunity within individual, for lack of a better word, departments where maybe budgets haven't been spent? Maybe we've said, this is your budget, and the department's only spent half of it, for example. And that's happened in multiple line items, so to speak.
Yeah,
Is there any opportunity to reset those budgets to then make up so that we don't have to, I mean, I don't want to cut student activities,
Right.
so.
I guess the two issues with that would be, some of those are way under budget for those reasons we listed related to the pandemic, but the ones that now remain, when we utilize ESSER funding to replace general fund, we don't put the revenue over in the general fund. We move the expense over to ESSER. So that ESSER's gone away now. So those things we were backfilling, just as one example, if you look at the virtual school program, we're paying 100% of that out of ESSER. But we didn't move ESSER money into the general fund budget. We took those, for lack of a better description, those bills and paid them out of ESSER. So the money still shows in the general fund. That inflates those amounts. That goes back to this chart right here. We did this budget in a way we believe it will generate the kinds of variances we had from 2013 to 2019, not the kinds you see from 20 to 23, and that you will see for 24. But in 25, we should be back to that. That is that modicum of difference that keeps us from going into the red. That's why we picked these things to remove. For one, they're things we don't currently have except for the permanent subs.
So when we see line items that appear to not be spent at their budget, are you telling me that what we're seeing is an inflated amount due to ESSER? I'm sorry.
Yes. The amount that remains in the general fund budget is inflated because we moved the expense to ESSER. We didn't take the ESSER money and move it to the general fund budget. We moved the expense over.
Okay, so next year, if we were presented, if we didn't change any of those, we wouldn't see those numbers.
No, you'd see numbers that look like that. That's our goal, for the number to look like that. The 2019 through 2013 variance, which averaged 1.2%.
Okay. And then my last question has to do back with that 17 million. Well, it's page 26 and 20, slide 26, no, slide 25, and of course 27. When you explained that any revenue in excess of expenses at the end of the fiscal year, so this year it's at least 17 million, is utilized, or it's recommended to us to utilize this as one-time or non-recurring expenses. Why is that allocated that way? For example, why, if we received in excess of revenue that we expected by 17 million, let's just use that number.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we not?
It'll be more than that.
Okay.
It'll be a lot more than that.
Why are we not allowed to take the 2.7 million that we're short and use some of that money to balance this budget? Why does it have to go into the non-recurring column?
If you chose to do that, which we don't recommend you do,
Right?
you already have in this budget 8.2
Current year.
this year,
Yes.
8.2 dependence on fund balance. All right, so we're recommending you subtract 4.1 from that, pull that out. So you still got 4.1 sitting there. Now you're going to go, before you've paid that off, basically, and add a 2.742 dependence back to it. You're kind of borrowing more money for your simplistic view. You're borrowing more money, even though you're borrowing it from yourself, before you paid off the amount you already borrowed. If that makes sense.
That makes sense, but I think I guess what doesn't make sense to me is why must that 17 million in excess go in? Why isn't that just not extra revenue that we can draw from?
Well, it is, but you can only get to draw it one time, because we've already taken it and used that in the calculation of how much the mill value will go up. That 17 million plays into the 22 we increase the mill value. Okay. So you do have it. You got to 17 one time, and that goes back to the man digging the hole, okay, which is kind of the best analogy we could come up with. So if you use the 17 million or a portion of it, it doesn't matter how much you use of it. Mm-hmm. Just makes the hole bigger or smaller. You're creating a hole for 26.
Okay.
Some amount of hole beyond what you have now. And you're using it as I would imagine you will use it in the future as you have in the past to pay for things that we have to have or have to do, which ultimately avoids either cutting something or increasing millage, because it won't all result from increased mill value, which I think is the whole reason this system is predicated on. The state gives you more money, and there's an expectation based on that letter of inflation and population growth that you raise local millage. It's just the way the system's designed, right, wrong, or indifferent. I think we've done a very good job, and this board's done a very good job in years past of not approaching, in most years, I think all but one, of the amount the state recommended the millage be increased.
Okay, that's all the questions I have right now. I may have more. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mosley. Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell.
Dr. Royster, on the meals, let's get straight on the meals. How many meals did they give us this year?
Recommended this year based on population and inflation, how much, Robin?
10.2 meals.
They gave us 10.2 meals this year.
And
we already have, if we take 1.5 away from the 25.3 meals, we would have 23.8 meals still on the table. And then we add the 10.2 meals to that.
Yes.
Now, the state legislators have done that to us with this Act 388. Where did they give us meals to assess in order for us to function? Everybody wants good schools. We want great schools in Greenville County. We have to have money to operate, to have great schools. And we've got all these people moving here thinking we've got the great schools, we got to keep the great schools. So with that being said about the meals, we have 23.8 plus the 10.2. If you don't use them, you lose them within 3 years, right? We have to.
I think there's a fraction of a meal that we would lose this year. Isn't that right, Robin?
0.2.
Okay. I know a couple of us have been here when we have assessed at least 10, 13 meals in 1 year. 1.5 meals is very conservative to balance this budget. So I'm asking you, can you explain to the people why we have to assess the meals for tax purposes? I mean, it's taxes, and they showed how much it is. And I know that I didn't understand our property tax bill until you explained to me about the little writing on the bottom of the tax bill, that homestead exemption, which is the same amount that they put that line item up on the tax bill, which is deceiving to the public. They should just take that line item out because they are taking it off at the bottom, but a lot of people don't read that writing at the bottom.
True.
So, and we don't get property taxes, not for operating expenses.
Not for owner-occupied homes,
Only,
that's correct.
owner-occupied homes. And another thing with the small businesses and the rental properties, I mean, that's having an effect on our renters. We talk about affordable housing and all of this, but we have to assess mills. This is what they put in place down in the legislature, that we could only do it on small businesses, on rental property, on cars, boats, and whatever, that it is really affecting our people, our renters. That's why the rent is so high, because the landlords have to increase the rent, because we have to place millage on them. So with the meals, if we don't, 1.5, have we ever, I know we did 0 before, but you've given us a budget where we need these things in order to function. Yeah, we need the increase in salaries, and we need that for all of our employees. But we have buildings to run. We have other things that need to be taken care of. 1.5%. 1.5 mil is very conservative. So can you explain to the people the thing about this, the Because, I mean, you know, you nickel and diamond trying to take from this budget.
And I mean,
One point
that's,
five mil is equal to the 2.7 or whatever.
you know, we called attention earlier to those two pretty thick books sitting over there. That's all the things that were asked for that we went through. So we've combed through this budget. We didn't put things in it that we didn't believe were important and necessary. You made a point about taking care of what we have. This district invested $1 billion in school construction, renovation, and improvement from 2002 to 2012. A portion of that was necessary because, quite honestly, the district didn't invest in maintaining facilities at the level they should have. So there's some things in there that you saw about adding a carpenter, adding fire and burglar alarm technicians, some things like that to keep up maintenance. Doesn't go directly to somebody sitting in a classroom, but it goes indirectly to that. I think the biggest evidence that we try to operate, and past boards have tried to operate in a very conservative manner, is the fact that even though every year we get a letter that says you should raise millage by this much to offset inflation and the growth, population growth, there's almost 35 mills sitting there that have never been levied. This is the next to the lowest increase that's ever been proposed since 2011. Now there are 3 zeros in there since 2011, 3 zeros, but the next closest one is this one, 1.5, the next smallest one.
I think it's very conservative for us to get a balanced budget. That's all I have, Dr. Stiles.
Thank you so much.
Question, another question. I have a question about your summer school line item that you have in there. Why is it that we're gonna do middle and high school online? Because I know a lot of the kids don't function real well online. Why are we doing summer school in the middle and high schools online with just a lab for the high schools?
Mr. McCoy.
For that, Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell, is because of the cost of it. Now, they'll still have places where they can come in and get assistance and help if they need it. There'll be labs still set up, but it is much cheaper and cost effective for us to run it that way versus bringing with transportation and students in for middle and high school.
Okay, it just said that you would have the lab for the high schools. What about the middle schools?
Same thing. We would have lab for middle school as well, yes. They'd have regional labs like we've done with high school for the last couple of years.
But we know with our students, some of them learn better with in-person, and we're making them completely online.
Well, again, that would be the point of having the lab in place. If a kid wanted to or chose to come every day, they could come every day and sit with a teacher.
So you will have a lab in place, labs in place for middle school too?
Regionally, middle and high. Yes, it won't be at every school. This budget doesn't have for in-person elementary or middle and high. We would be going back to having regional centers for summer school.
Well, see, I have a problem with that, with it not being in person. I would increase the budget to get in-person summer school. But that's all I have. That's all I have, Dr. Stiles.
Thank you so much. Mr. Sailors.
Well, Mrs. Mosley and Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell had covered 2 of mine. So let me ask this one, Dr. Royster. Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell did bring up a good point in the fact that a lot of what we're dealing with here is by virtue of the fact that we've been made a victim of circumstance on decisions out of Columbia. That's a given. Another one that, touching on what Mrs. Levinas-Wells said in a comment about waiting until the legislature makes their decision. Again, we're a victim of that circumstance because, valid point, they don't have the courage to pass a budget before a primary. And then secondly, we have a deadline to get our budget loaded in the system for operational purposes which also puts us in a squeeze from a timing standpoint. So 2 questions. Number one, when was the last time we passed a budget here that was approved at the school board level after the legislature did theirs? And secondly, how long does it take to load this material into the system once it's approved?
I mean, do you recall? Not in the last 10 or 15 that I can remember. Do you recall, Stephanie? Normally, when we have the between number, because it's gone to conference committee, so it's got to be this number or this number.
Right.
So this is actually based on the higher number, but it's not higher but by $2 million, which is another place that we got to be aware of when we're looking at revenue in excess of expense. So we have utilized the higher of the 2 numbers.
Okay.
But the other question is, it's not as much the loading it, though that's time consuming, it's the making sure it's loaded right, because July 1, we start paying people on that new budget. And the last thing anybody wants is to be paid incorrectly. You would certainly hear from those folks, and we should hear from them if we don't pay them correctly. Because a large number of the 12,000 employees start drawing new year's wages on July 1.
Well, I appreciate your answers, and I look forward to the day when our friends in Columbia can get their head out of their rear end and do their job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sailors. Ms. Doolin.
Thank you. Everyone has had great questions and have taken some of mine, but so circling back to what Mr. Saylor said, when is the state going to finalize their budget?
Where's Julie? You want to offer a guess?
This month. Here. Ms. Doolin, they are coming back this week, and then they're coming back again after the primaries, which would be the week of June 18th. And we expect it may happen then, but it could go into the following week.
As a reminder, when it goes to conference committee, which it has, unless they're given free conference, which they've not been.
Correct.
They got to be between the Senate number and the House number. We've taken the larger of the 2 numbers. So any news you'll get will not be better news.
Because in the last 2 years, I think it did come back with better news. It's not like a windfall, but slightly better news.
If we took the lesser of the 2, which we generally have done, but because the difference was fairly small this year, we took the larger of the 2.
One of my other questions is, I know you, on page 27, I think you just have to flip back 1 page. We did identify $17 million of revenue collected that we were not anticipating as of March, but what are those, how much was collected in April and May? Do you know?
The amount that shows that would be sustained into next year, but it is still a little bit short of 22 million, but we went with the 22 million. You know how much it was, Robin?
You mean for April it was 22 million?
No. The amount in April and May is tracking with the amount that produced the 17. If you take out the large months, you got to take out January and February. So if you look at because that's when the bulk of tax revenue other than cars comes in. So if you look at the other months, April and May tracked with, and we fully believe June will track with the other non-January, February months, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, I like ballpark, how much is that? Okay, sure. So I looked back, and the Elevate program is a pilot program funded by the unassigned fund balance, even though it is employee salaries.
Actually, the amount that's funded by fund balance are the bonus payments.
Bonus payment.
Yes, and they have been calculated to include the amount for the duration of the pilot.
Which is 4 years.
So there's 4 years of what we would estimate to be the max payout for the 4-year period. At that point, a decision would need to be made whether that continues or not and how it be funded at that point.
Well, are there any other proposed budget items that could be considered a pilot program that could be funded?
There's nothing in this, there's nothing in this budget, nothing in here that we've put in that is not a recurring annual cost. Period.
Well, Elevate will be recurring if you keep it.
It's not in this budget.
Because we used fund balance. So if there's something else that might be a pilot program, such as substitute teachers.
I would argue that you piloted it by having it for 3 years. That's not really a pilot program. And at the end of 3 years, I think people would expect it to be continued. Then you've got that hole to fill. Anything in here that you take out and use fund balance to pay for creates a hole down the road because it's all recurring. So if that's the case, to the point of I was asked what would be removed, just remove that. Don't fund it. Now, we believe it was important. We believe it adds value. We believe it helps with teacher retention and helps provide relief to the schools. But we believe it needs to be there going forward. And so it's recurring.
So if Elevate goes forward, then we will, I guess the bonus amounts will be included in the budget in 4 years.
At some point, at the end of 3 years, because it takes 4 years to get 3 years data, a decision will have to be made. Was this effective? If it was determined it was effective, then a decision will have to be made. How will it be funded going forward? Now, the additional base compensation is being paid for Title I allocations at those 2 schools. At that point, that decision would need to be made. We'll also have 3 years of payouts. We very conservatively projected every school would earn every dollar of incentive they could earn to make sure the money was there. At the end of 3 years, you'll know how many schools earned how much money. So that amount can probably be adjusted. That's another reason to fund it on the basis that we funded it. All right, it may not, maybe it doesn't work. Maybe we won't want to continue it at all. Maybe it works, but we're only paying out about 20% of what we set aside, so you need to fund 20%. There are huge variables to that. There's no variable, for example, with those permanent subs. We know they've been effective. We know they've helped schools. We know they got a certain number. There is not a day goes by in this current environment that even at our smallest school, we don't have someone absent.
Ms. Stack, did you find the
Yes, increase of 13 million,
13 million in April?
April and May.
April and May. So that's 30 million total that's going to go, that's unallocated and will go to the general fund.
I'm sorry, that is what we increased to project our millage increase for next year. Yeah, you can't add it to the 17 million because it already includes the 17 million.
Oh, I was asking about what the tax revenue is for April and May, like the local tax revenue.
So April,
Ms. Deck, if you need a few more moments, I'll go to Mr. Sailors, and then I'll come back. If Ms. Doolin, unless there's an issue with that, I'll go to Mr. Sailors to give Mrs. Stack some time, and then I'll come back to your question. Mr. Sailors?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll be quick unless Robin needs me to extemporaneously extend. Dr. Oyster, just so there's clarification, we have a 1.5 mil increase recommendation this year.
Yes, sir.
If this board chooses to kick that can down the road to next year, it would be, current estimate would be as much as 4.5 mils to cover the hole that you're creating this year plus what needs to be addressed next year.
So you're talking about the hole that already exists?
Yes.
Of 4 million, which would be like a mil, just under 2 mils, plus this 1.5. But in an environment where you don't know what other demands you're gonna have.
Well, that was my question. So,
That's the concern with it, more so than anything.
so it could be minimum 1.2 plus 1.5 next year is 2.7 minimum. 3.
1.75 and 1.5, something like that.
Okay, let's say for discussion's sake 3.2, whatever. Plus the unknowns.
Right. Who last year health insurance went up 4%, Stephanie?
3.7.
3.7. Now that's January to December. This
Correct.
year, the ad is 10%. So we don't know,
11.8.
again, a mandated increase to us, we don't know what that might be.
Well, my point being is this. We have a known this year of 1.5. We have an unknown next year of anywhere from 2.5 to 5.0 or even higher, depending on what forecast you're looking at in insurance and other economic developments. 6 of us, to your point earlier, are on a ballot this year. This time next year, 6 of us could still be here, or 6 of us could be different people. My point being is we have a known now with a group of dedicated trustees that understand the pros and the cons of this budget. Do we really want to risk kicking that beer can down the road for another year and having 6 different faces up here that don't know, understand, or have the history that we do, and that budget does not pass? Just food for thought. Thank you.
I think that goes to our recommendation. If you all determine you don't want to commit to a 1.5 mil increase, that we need to remove $2.742 million from the budget.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sailors. Robin, are you ready? If not, I also had a few remarks. If you're ready, we'll go back. Okay, well, let's first, or if Robin is ready, we will go back to Ms. Doolin. You need a few more minutes?
Yes,
Okay, then we're gonna move to you, Ms. Brett.
I figure I can help you waste a little time here. So Act 388, when was that passed? And is that passed into perpetuity, or will that ever end? Like, what happened? I know we've talked about this before, but let's go back into it.
At this point, my answer would be in perpetuity because there seems to be no desire to change it. 2008. Now, interestingly enough, when it first passed in 2008, it had a maintenance of effort clause to it, which basically imposed upon the board the legal duty to raise local taxes by a specified amount determined by formula every year. So about 2 years in, 10 or 11, they removed that clause, but the structure's still the same. Here's the money, here's the state share. We expect you to raise taxes by a certain amount, and they send you that amount. Basically changing it from, well, you don't have any choice about doing it, to, well, you kind of got a choice, but the whole system's based on you got to do something or you can't keep up. So I don't see any hope they're going to change it, because there's a lot about this that I mean, it's just I guess a personal aside almost, but it's also my professional opinion. When you look at those examples we gave, and I need to mention this about every one of these examples, we don't generate these examples, we get them from the county. So whatever your tax bill shows, whatever it shows, we got these from the county. That's where they come from. The problem, not with this one, that note at the bottom, 50 to 95% of the actual value. The more pointed example is the one I gave earlier. If you imagine that rental house in Greer being in a neighborhood of very similar rental houses, and you own one, and you've owned it for 25 or 30 years, it's only been capped at going up in value 15% every 5 years. So if you've owned it 30 years, 6 times that 15%. I move in next door, it's being reassessed 6 times, right? I move in by the house next door and move a renter in there, I'm gonna pay 95% of the current value of it. That's another, there's just so many inequities in this. The other thing we're starting to see now is in multifamily housing, them being included in fee in lieu of arrangements or multi-county parks that were designed to recruit business and industry. So there's this constant erosion. What's really saving us, we believe, are those values that do go up on some of this property, but the fact people are continuing to move in here and they're bringing cars with them. And I think Robin's done.
Yeah, I am.
Thank you. Okay, Robin.
So, thank you, Ms. Brett.
Yes.
Robin thanks you.
Ms. Doolan, it is approximately 13 million for those 2 months. Now, we've not closed May yet.
Okay, so for April and part of May, there was $13 million in revenue. So that is 30 million with the 17 already that we know of from March.
Not above total.
Total.
Well, 13 million can't be the total if it includes 17 million from March.
No, the 17 million was through March. The collection for April was 13 million, not 13 million above what April would be projected to bring in, 13 million.
Yes.
How much above projected was that?
Well,
I think that's actually your question.
The projected amount was met in March, and there was 17 million over for the year.
You're talking about financial statements.
Yes.
Yes, yes. So that 17 million includes an interest component, not just your property taxes.
Right.
Okay, so the property taxes is an additional 13 million.
And is there an additional interest component also?
We don't have
know.
that yet. Let's see.
I think the interest might have been like 7 million.
We maintained interest based on, and I made that statement earlier, based on the volatility of interest, because like I said, in a 6-month period when it doubled, but it could also drop that much. We've maintained a minimal level of interest as a part of the budget going forward, not recognizing that whole 7 million. Again, we used the greater of the two numbers from the state, which is $2 million, that it could end up being $2 million less, which that provides us some room of comfort for that. Again, none of this is exact science. It is our best estimate based on past patterns, certainties going forward, and uncertainties going forward. Now, I'll have to say, at this point, I think I would hope that anyone could imagine that if we felt comfortable with recommending to you not needing that 1.5 mil increase, none of us would have wanted to sit through all of this tonight. But we clearly don't feel comfortable with that. And so you have our best recommendation. if you all do not want to move forward with the 1.5 mil, we will provide to you what we recommend you remove. And we feel comfortable with that. Without, absent those permanent subs, the rest of that on that list, we do not currently have. So it's not like we're taking something out we already have, with that one exception.
I just have one last question. Since you said that most of the line item discrepancies were because of ESSER money funding, I'm not going to pick on any other departments. I'm only going to look at our board line items. And I would like to know what ESSER money went into the Board of Trustees Purchase Services account, because we budgeted just over 200,000, but we spend less than 12,000. So that's less than 1,000 per each of us.
Right, two things.
But where?
One of those.
ESSER money for anything?
Nope, we didn't use any ESSER money for that, but two things to, I think, brings a little more clarity to it. That becomes part of that variance up there if it's not spent. The other is, I believe those funds to which you reference, or how much annually, Robin, that's actually purchase services. That's the deductible for lawsuits and the money that is in the legal department budget for contract legal services if we need them. We never know from one year to the next how many, if any, contract attorneys we have to engage that are not covered by insurance. We also have a deductible. So every time that someone files a suit against us, we have a deductible that we have to pay towards that the insurance does not cover. That can vary greatly from year to year. So we're talking about a couple $100,000 in a $922 million budget.
Yes, sir, because I'm only asking about our department right now.
Well, that quite technically is not the department of the board. That's legal services, which is an administrative function, but the state accounting system places that in the category of board and superintendent expenditures.
We have a separate line item for legal services, which also we don't we don't spend the budget on that. But you said that the reason that there's a discrepancy is because of ESSER funds, but
that's the reason there's 8.8% variance, not an average of 1.2. And that is true. That variance is on the entire budget, not on snapshots of portions of the budget.
well, in my example, you said we didn't use the ESSER funds for this one, so that's why I was asking.
No, we didn't. So then that would go to contributing to the variance, but it doesn't explain the 8.8. Those variances that exceed the average of 1.2 from the years 13 through 19 are attributable to ESSER, either significantly reduced operations and or the infusion of funds that paid for things that were budgeted in the general fund budget.
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. Mr. Cochran.
Thank you. I know we've talked a good bit about creating holes down the road by either not raising taxes or by using fund balance. But again, we only need 0.3% of our budget. And I point out again, since this is still up there, not a single year have we ever come that close. None of them. Not one. And we have also discussed prior that when we run out of money at a certain line, we can shift that. And it's done all the time, apparently, every year. We shift things from one line item to another line item to cover that. And so again, to me, when pointing back to the fact that between, I think, 2021 and 22, we dropped, we dropped 8.2 million in our use of our fund balance. And if we just simply took this 2.742, took off the tax increase, took this 2.742, we would be less than 7 million. So we've already did it with 8 million. Apparently we weren't too concerned about creating a hole back then, but all of a sudden we're really concerned about it now. My second thought is going back to Ms. Mosley's question earlier, and all those things that were in the list. Again, I've already come up with 2 places I think we could cut things, going back to Ms. Doolin's earlier comments, and I read all that stuff that was sent, the 4 or 5 pages addressing all that. I still certainly think there is some room to make some cuts there, even after having looked at every bit of that. Or we can use the fund balance. And so if the idea right now is to cut all those things, permanent substitutes at all the schools and all those other things that were mentioned, I basically hope somebody's got the coffee pot hooked up, because I think it's going to be a long night. And I think we may be coming back another time if there were enough people that feel the way I do about it, because I do not think we would have to cut those things. It always seems like we need to make cuts. Oh, let's go to the personnel. Let's cut the personnel. And I do not think for 0.3% of the budget that we need to do that. When was the last time the overall mill rate for Greenville County schools for the tax was actually lowered? I'm not talking about it didn't go up. When was it lowered the last time? I mean, these are cumulative. They never go down unless we somehow chose to lower it. So how many years has it been since we
Ms. Stack, can you speak to that?
It is lower during reassessment periods. The county auditor will look at what the value of a mill is and look at the revenue that it brings in, and reassessment has to be revenue neutral. So we can't get extra revenue just because things are reassessed during that year.
Right. My point is, as you said, it's neutral, so we never get less money based on that reassessment. We might get less money per meal, possibly, but we wouldn't get less money. Is that correct?
Get exactly the same. It's to be calculated where you receive exactly the same you received in the preceding year.
Thanks.
You realize no value of the growth of a mill in that year.
Thank you. So my point is, have we ever cut the amount of taxes that were coming into Greenville County schools?
Other than in a year of reassessment, not to my knowledge, because there has not been a year that it costs less to operate than it did the year before.
Right. And my point is, once we raise the taxes, again, basically they never go back down. It's always going to be that or higher. It's kind of, I still think the idea of raising taxes one year and saying, well, if we don't, we might hypothetically, we don't know what's going to happen next year. We don't have any idea. But if we don't raise the taxes this year, we'll have to raise them more the next year again without having that data to show us that. I just don't feel that we should just say, well, we got to raise taxes because hypothetically we might have to raise it more in the future. And my last comment, just because we have the authority to tax the people of Greenville County does not mean we have to do so. And certainly, I don't think we need to do so over 0.3%. Thank you, Dr. Stiles.
Thank you, Mr. Cochran. Ms. Middleton.
Thank you. Have we ever not balanced our budget? Like, has it ever been that we didn't have enough money to do something? Okay. So we are making a determination now at the beginning of the fiscal year, and we anticipate that we will not be at the end of the fiscal year saying that we have to cut this or we can't do that, or we always come within our budget.
We are required, this body is required to have a balanced budget at the beginning of the fiscal year starting July 1. Now, you can use all kind of different ways to balance that, but you're required to have a balanced budget. So you do not have an option about that. Again, absent an unforeseen catastrophic event. We don't anticipate there any issue with what we have forecast for expense and what we have forecast for revenue. Difficult to forecast revenue, shared that with you earlier. But I think, despite the other points made tonight, the fact there's 35 mills sitting there that has not been used, I think shows a very conservative philosophy of past administrations, but more importantly, a conservative philosophy of past boards. If not, there wouldn't be 35 mills sitting there.
We are conservative. I am personally very competitive. And I would like to see our schools be absolutely number one. Not number 4, but number 1. So we have to strive to always get more and do better. That's how I am. That's how I feel. So the thought of cutting anything, if that's what we would have to do, I don't want to cut security. I don't want to cut substitute teachers. I don't want to cut athletic coaches. Anything like that. Of course, we never would cut salaries because that is toxic to our school system. We would lose teachers. I don't want to lose nurses. I don't want to lose any of the things that we have accumulated. So that's just my comment. I'm very simple. I probably simplified things too much, but I think that's pretty conservative, and we got a good balance. You know, we're asking for a lot of things, but don't we want to be the very best? I want to have all those things. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Middleton. Ms. Bush.
All right. I thought we were going to get through the night without talking about Act 388. But here it goes, because I was in Columbia and part of that delegation that came up with this on the back, might I say, of a chicken bucket lid is where the basic principles for Act 388 was written down. So that tells you to begin with, you know, what was going to take place. And I had more trips to Columbia than I even want to bring to memory, talking about the three-legged stool and how Act 388 was going to make us reliant on things that, while we're sitting here tonight, what we're trying to forecast the future. But when I look back at those numbers and how we have forecast, we've done a pretty darn good job up until we got into the pandemic era and things kind of went haywire. I remember saying this, you know, this is not going to work, and you know, most of all those legislators are gone now. But the legislators that are there now inherited Act 388, much the same way that we've inherited it, and all of the problems and issues and forecasts that go along with it. Prior to Act 388, when I was first elected onto this board, the auditor sent a letter, just like the auditor sent this year, just like the state, the Budget and Control Board sends that letter. But they sent it to the auditor, not the school district, and said, this is how much you have to increase Greenville County taxes to go by the formula, which is the rate of inflation and the rate of growth. So the auditor had to do that. It was not the school board. But in the genius of Act 388, that all changed. The auditor was sent that, and I think the school board, if memory serves me right, we had 2 or 3 meals that we could work with if we wanted to go above what the state formula allowed us. We were all limited at like just those couple of meals. I think it was 2 meals. So after that, now the letter comes to us. So had not been for Act 388, the auditor of Greenville County would be getting a letter this year that says add 10 meals. As a matter of fact, if you went back, those 35 meals that we haven't raised because of the state funding formula would also have been put on our school district, on our taxpayers. So I look at it in a sense of there are 35 meals that we have chosen by the change in the law that this school board has said, no, we're not taking that money. We will find ways to be more efficient while still striving to be the best school district, not in the state, but in the area and in the nation, which since I've been here, we have always strived for that goal. So it is, I think it's phenomenal that when you look at those numbers after what happened with Act 388, that we have been able to stay that close. It's never a popular political thing to raise taxes. And I remember the days when it was the headline, it wasn't about that the teachers were rewarded for all the work they did, that every employee of Greenville County Schools was rewarded for the work they did. The headline just read Greenville County School Board raises taxes. When we were, in a sense, we're still doing what the state says you're required to do, but we're choosing not to do the 10, we're choosing to do 1.5. So it is, yes, we do have the authority. Just because we're given the authority, we have the authority to have done 35, and we're choosing to do 1. So I can't see, I've heard from too many schools how much that substitute teacher, having that substitute teacher permanently there has made a huge impact. So it's just tough to choose to be able to say, well, wasn't it nice that we had it? But because, and small business is here tonight. I own a small business. This is going to impact me probably as much as anybody because my small business has a fleet of vehicles that we use as delivery vehicles. So I'm going to have to pay more on each vehicle. I'm going to have to pay more on my business. But, it's that kind of investment that I am willing to pay because we have moved we saw the things that we have accomplished in the last 10 years. We sit here and it's just incredible where Greenville County Schools has gone the last 10 years, in spite of a recession, in spite of a pandemic, in spite of all of the things that we've had against us. And so it's just politics here tonight. We're talking about a 1.5. So I just wanted, I couldn't get past Act 388 and that whole history of it. And I was told, I think it was by Senator Leatherman, that train's done left the station. You're just wasting your breath. And I said, well, you're getting ready to see a train wreck. And that's what we're still doing. We're still pulling the bodies and the pieces out of that train wreck that was Act 388. So, and I don't know if there's even any legislator left that passed Act 388 anymore. But we're all going by what was done. And so you see, it can be very devastating making a political decision because we don't know what's going to happen next year. So we could sit here and make a decision tonight that, just like Mr. Saylor said, 6 of us could not be here next year. but it could be a train wreck too for several years down the road. It could absolutely, because look back and see how we're still suffering from what, 2008, and we're still dealing with decisions that were made back then that are affecting us every year in our budget. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. Ms. Morrison Fair?
Thank you, Dr. Stiles. I would also like to weigh in on, after listening to the comments, especially the comments that says every teacher deserves a raise. I so heartily believe that. The staff, the administration, the teachers have been on this ship and has steered this ship through many, many uncertain times since I've been on this board, and I appreciate it. And now we're at a point that we can also give additional services. I can't tell you how many substitute teachers have come and said, you know, please honor us, give us a raise. Every school needs that support. If you have not been a teacher, there's no need for me to expound on that. I believe that we are very conservative in Greenville County. I agree with the recommendation of the administration. And I just want to make a comment that when you vote, if you say every teacher deserves a raise, then you need to back that up with your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison Fair. Ms. LaVentus Wells, back to you.
Paid about 13,000 or so a year, no benefits, but I'm willing to unload my salary because I don't need it. I'd rather put it to the floor. So that's me, and that's what I would do. And I don't want to cut substitute teachers. For goodness sakes, we just heard somebody earlier that said, they take our subs out of, and we've got to figure, and we split classes and put them in different classrooms. And what good does that do with those students that have to be in one side over here and one side over there, and the students that are in the classes and the teachers that are teaching? I don't get it. I am very frustrated. But yeah, I waive my salary. I don't need it. I'd rather it go to a better cause. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I did have a few comments, so I'm going to do one last call. Mr. Cochran, did you have your hand raised again? Okay. Mr. Cochran, I'm sorry.
Just say, I think from all the comments I've heard tonight, I don't think there's a single person on this board that is not in favor of keeping all the teacher salaries, all the teacher raises, all the employee raises. I think that's 100% across the board, I suspect. So our vote tonight really has very little to do with that because we all plan on keeping all of that. What it comes down to is whether we can make some sort of arrangement either through the using our general fund or go back and make those cuts that are not to personnel and find 0.3% of the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cochran. Last call. Ms. Doolin?
Thank you. Is it correct that last year the tax increase was 9 mils?
Yes, ma'am.
Which was equivalent to almost $15 million? Does that sound right?
Yes, ma'am.
So the tax increase last year covered everything in the budget, plus there will be some excess to roll into the general fund on July 1st, according to the balance statement, which Ms. Stack said was right now around $30 million, right?
$30 million.
I don't have, I'm a numbers person, so I've got to have that kind of numbers in front of me before I can say you are correct. But our tax revenue that has come in this year has been very robust, just like it has across the state. So we are taking that into consideration as we project our mill value for next year as well.
Which is why we increased it a cumulative $22 million more than we increased it for first reading. So the total increase of the value of a mill amounts to how much, Robin?
It's 26 million.
$26 million from this year. And kind of as a reminder of that, probably go up a little bit next year, but look at how that jumps up and down. So you have our best recommendation based on, I want to hazard a guess on how many years of experience of putting together not only this budget, but budgets in other places. There's more than 100 years, well over 100 years of experience putting this together. I understand it's complicated. I understand it's complex, but we are providing you the best recommendation that we can provide based on our experience, our knowledge, and the past practices of the school district, which have resulted in, I believe, directly resulted in the kind of gains that we shared at the outset of this presentation, and resulted in the sort of sound fiscal management that's caused us to end up every year before COVID, we're now entering in a post-COVID environment, with having, on average, expended within 1.2% of our budget. And the part over we have greatest control, over which we have greatest control, is the smallest part. That's the 8% that's not people. So you have our best recommendation. It includes increasing the value of a mill by a cumulative $26 million. There remains this amount that, based on what we know, we do not feel comfortable taking that $26 million to right at $30 million. And I would recommend that you not do that. I would recommend, if you don't want to pass the 1.5, you remove the things that we recommended removing.
I really just was trying to compare from last year because I couldn't remember, but if the tax increase from last year netted $15 million for the budget, it also netted $30 million extra that will go into the general fund on July 1st. Or around 30 million, whatever is extra collected the remaining of the fiscal year.
But again, that amount includes the interest.
Yes.
That is different.
Which isn't really tax revenue.
Okay.
It's interest income from the investment pool.
But we don't know how much will be collected in June. Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Michelle Goodwin-Caldwell, do you have another question?
Yes, I do, this afternoon. But I think that we pay Dr. Royster and his staff the big bucks to bring us this, and we should approve and say thank you for bringing us a 1.5% meal increase in order for us to do what we do in Greenville County. I mean, just like he said, he's been doing budgets for years. We're the board. We're supposed to trust him. He's our only employee. Then he delegates. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you, Dr. Royster, for bringing a budget with just 1.5 mil. Thank you.
Ms. Goodwin Caldwell, that's a whole bunch of people sitting in this room that have done this a long time.
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin Caldwell. Last call again. Well, I know it's late, and the board chair always goes last, but I do have a few comments that I would like to offer. I think it's important as a politician to be transparent with our employees and with our constituents. And tonight I have no problem with that. I can tell you that I've listened to constituents, I've listened to teachers, community leaders, and tonight I've listened to my fellow board members and our superintendent. And I've tried to wait until now to come to a decision. I've also studied this budget, spent a lot of time on it today, just trying to make sure that I was making the right decision on behalf of our students. No doubt that a millage increase will take courage, because everybody sitting up here on this dais, we know that sometimes there's repercussions for approving a millage increase. But that's not what we're called to do. To worry about the repercussions, we're called to do what's right. I'm here to share with you that I feel this budget is minimal with a 1.5 millage increase. I think that's minimal. I think it's very conservative. It's reasonable. And it is supportive of our students and our employees. It takes us to the next step, which I've heard multiple trustees say that's what they want. It takes us to the next step. In my opinion, any cuts would only serve as a barrier to our continued success. So tonight, I am prepared to support this budget because I believe it's the right thing to do. So with that said, I will bring the motion back to the floor. I'd like to read it, and then we will have a vote. We already had the motion by Mr. Sailors and a second by Mrs. Morrison-Fair. We have a recommended motion from the administration to approve the FY25 general fund budget as presented.
Madam Chairman, I'd request a roll call.
Okay, Ms. Fortner, we'd like to do a roll call vote at this time.
Ms. Brett?
No.
Ms. Bush?
Yes.
Mr. Cochran?
No.
Ms. Doolin? No. Ms. Goodwin Caldwell?
Yes.
Ms. Levinas Wells?
No.
Ms. Middleton?
Yes.
Ms. Morrison Fair?
Yes.
Ms. Mosley?
Yes.
Dr. Presley?
Yes.
Mr. Sailors?
Yes.
Dr. Stiles?
Yes.
8-4.
The vote is 8-4. The motion carries. The budget is approved.
Madam Chairman, I make a motion, we adjourn.
Have a motion. We have a motion by Mr. Sailors, a second by Dr. Presley. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The motion carries. We are adjourned at 9:18 p.m.
What she said.
You tell.